Captain Mira Jensen stared through the cracked viewport at the crystalline ice fields of Arcturon III, stretching to the horizon under teal skies. The jagged formations reflected the dim light of the distant sun, creating an eerie glow that painted the interior of her damaged freighter in ghostly blues and greens. The beauty of the frozen moon did nothing to ease her mounting anxiety. "Argos! Damage report!" she commanded, her breath misting in the rapidly cooling air. The ship's AI responded with a slight static interference, its usually smooth voice fragmented. "Hull integrity at 32%. Life support systems compromised. Estimated functional time remaining, 6 hours, 17 minutes. Mira pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the viewport. 6 hours. 6 hours until the ship's environmental systems failed completely, leaving her to freeze to death or suffocate in the toxic atmosphere of this godforsaken moon. She hadn't expected the meteor strike. It had come out of nowhere, tearing through the ship's shields like they were nothing more than tissue paper. The impact had sent her freighter, the Ariadne, spiraling down to the moon's surface, where it now lay half buried in crystalline ice. "Communications? Still offline, Captain. The impact damaged the primary array. Attempting to reroute through secondary systems." Mira sighed. She was a salvage pilot, used to navigating the dangers of deep space to recover valuable technologies and materials from abandoned ships and stations. The Ariadne wasn't much to look at. An old Class D freighter with mismatched hull plates and systems that had been repaired more times than she could count. But it was hers. More importantly, it was supposed to get her back to Nova Station with the haul of rare minerals she'd collected from the asteroid belt in the next system over. Those minerals represented months of work and the promise of enough credits to upgrade her ship's outdated navigation system. Now she'd be lucky to get off this moon alive. She pushed away from the viewport and began pacing the bridge, her heavy boots echoing on the metal floor. The temperature was dropping quickly. She could see her breath now, and her fingers were growing numb despite her thermal gloves. She needed to think. There had to be a way out of this. A sudden flash of light outside caught her attention. She rushed back to the viewport, squinting against the glare. A small vessel was descending through the teal clouds, its engines leaving trails of vapor in the thin atmosphere. It wasn't a human ship. The design was too organic, with curved lines and a pearlescent hull that shifted colors as it moved. "Argos, identify that ship," she ordered, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Unable to identify specific vessel. Captain, configuration suggests Zenovian engineering." "Zenovian." Mira's stomach tightened. The bioengineered species wasn't technically hostile toward humans, but relations had been tense ever since the resource disputes in the Proxima sector. Zenovians were known for their advanced biotechnology and their ability to interface directly with machines through their unique neural pathways. They were also notoriously private, rarely interacting with humans outside of official diplomatic channels or trade negotiations. What was a Zenovian ship doing in this remote system? The vessel touched down about 100 meters from the Ariadne, kicking up a cloud of crystalline dust that sparkled in the pale sunlight. Mira watched as a hatch opened in its side, and a figure emerged. From this distance, she could make out little more than a slender silhouette, encased in what appeared to be a glowing exosuit, standard protection against the moon's toxic atmosphere and sub-zero temperatures. "Argos, any communications from the visitor?" "Negative, Captain. However, I am detecting a systematic scan of our hull integrity." Mira frowned. "They're assessing the damage?" "It appears so." She watched as the figure made its way across the ice field toward her ship, moving with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with the bulky appearance of the exosuit. The suit glowed with an internal light, shifting from blue to green as the figure navigated the treacherous terrain. "Argos, prepare to seal all internal bulkheads if necessary, and activate the emergency defense systems. Defense systems currently at 23% capacity. Captain, not enough to pose any real threat, But the visitor didn't need to know that. Mira grabbed her sidearm from its charging station and checked the power cell. Nearly full, small comfort, but better than nothing. A metallic scraping sound echoed through the ship, followed by a series of rhythmic taps. The visitor was at the airlock. Argos external visual. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a feed from the external camera. The figure stood at the airlock, tools already extended from compartments in the exosuit. The helmet was opaque, revealing nothing of the face beneath, but the movements were purposeful, skilled. They appear to be attempting repairs. Captain. Mira blinked in surprise. Repairs? Not entry? Affirmative. The visitor is sealing the breach in the outer hull near the primary airlock. Mira holstered her weapon, but kept it within easy reach. If the Zenovian wanted to help, she wasn't going to stop them, but she wasn't going to trust them blindly either. She'd survived this long in the salvage business by being cautious. Maintain full surveillance. Argos, alert me to any change in their activities. Yes, Captain. Mira made her way through the ship's corridors, following the sounds of the repair work. The temperature continued to drop, and she found herself shivering despite her thermal gear. Ice was beginning to form on the interior walls, where moisture had condensed and frozen. She paused at a junction, considering her options. The logical course of action would be to stay on the bridge, maintain a safe distance from the unknown visitor. But curiosity and a desperate need to understand her situation pushed her forward. She reached the damaged section of the ship and peered through a small observation port in the bulkhead. The visitor was visible now, working on the hull breach from the inside. The airlock had been sealed, allowing them to enter without compromising what remained of the ship's atmosphere. The exosuit glowed brighter now, casting strange, shifting patterns on the frost-covered walls. Tools extended from various compartments, some recognizable, others utterly alien in design. Mira watched, fascinated, as the visitor worked with incredible speed and precision. The breach was slowly closing as nanomaterials spread across the gap, bonding with the existing hull and creating a seamless repair. It was impressive technology, far beyond anything available to most human salvage operators. The visitor suddenly paused, head tilting slightly, as if listening to something. Then, without warning, they turned directly toward the observation port where Mira stood watching. Mira froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't made a sound, and the port was small. How had they known she was there? The figure stood motionless for a long moment, then raised a hand in what seemed like a greeting. Deciding that hiding was pointless now, Mira pressed the intercom button beside the port. "Thank you for the assistance," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Captain Mira Jensen of the salvage vessel Ariadne." The figure didn't respond verbally, but nodded once before returning to the repairs. The silence was unnerving, but Mira reminded herself that Zenovians often avoided direct communication with humans when possible. Their own language relied heavily on biochemical signals and neural transmissions that humans couldn't perceive. "Argos, can you establish any form of communication with our visitor? I am attempting to synchronize with standard Zenovian translation protocols." "Captain." However, the visitor has not activated any communication systems. The repair work continued in silence, the breach gradually closing as the nanomaterials spread and solidified. Mira watched, both grateful for the help and increasingly curious about her mysterious benefactor. "Hull integrity now at 48% and rising," Argos reported. "Life support system stabilizing. Estimated functional time extended to 12 hours, 22 minutes. Better, but still, not enough to wait for rescue. And with communications down, no one knew she was here. The Ariadne would need to be capable of at least a short FTL jump to reach the nearest outpost." A sudden alarm blared through the ship, red emergency lights flashing in the corridor. "Warning," Argos announced, its voice urgent. "Power fluctuation detected in the primary reactor. energy levels dropping rapidly. The visitors' movements became more hurried, the tools working at an increased pace as they apparently recognized the new threat. The glow of the exosuit dimmed briefly, then brightened again, as if drawing on some internal reserve. "What's happening, Argos?" Mira demanded. "The reactor containment field is destabilizing. The meteor impact may have caused more damage than initially detected. Current energy output at 62% and falling." Mira watched as the visitor abandoned the hull repair, now mostly complete, and moved quickly toward the engine room. She hesitated only briefly before following, keeping a safe distance. The engine room was in worse shape than the rest of the ship. Conduits hung from the ceiling, sparking occasionally as power surged through damaged systems. The central reactor housing was intact, but the monitoring stations surrounding it showed critical warnings across all displays. The visitor moved to the main control console, exosuit glowing brightly as they interfaced with the ship's systems. Mira stayed by the entrance, watching as diagnostic programs ran across the screens faster than she could follow. "Energy levels at 47% and falling," Argos reported. "Reactor containment field integrity at 69%. The visitor seemed to hesitate, hands hovering over the controls. Then, in a move that made Mira gasp, they reached up and began to unseal their helmet. "Wait!" Mira called out, stepping forward instinctively. "The atmosphere!" But the visitor was already lifting the helmet away, revealing what lay beneath. Mira stopped in her tracks, staring in astonishment. The face that turned toward her was unmistakably Zenovian. Elongated features, pale iridescent skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light, large eyes with vertical pupils that adjusted rapidly to the dim lighting of the engine room. But it wasn't the alien features that shocked Mira. It was what happened next. As the helmet came completely free, a network of fine, glowing filaments extended from the back of the Zenovian's head, a neural interface more complex than any Mira had ever seen. The filaments moved with apparent intelligence, seeking connection points on the ship's systems. "Energy levels at 38%, Argos warned. "Reactor containment failing." The Zenovian turned back to the console, the neural filaments connecting with various ports and access points. The moment the connections were complete, the ship's systems began to respond. Screens flickered with renewed energy, and the warning alarms quieted slightly. Mira watched in fascination and horror. She knew that Zenovians could interface with technology, but she'd never witnessed it directly. The neural connection was intimate, vulnerable, and strictly regulated by Zenovian cultural protocols. For a Zenovian to expose their interface in the presence of a human was almost unheard of. The exosuit continued to open, not just at the helmet but along the torso as well, revealing more of the neural interface. Filaments extended from the Zenovian's spine and shoulders, connecting with additional systems. The ship responded immediately, power levels stabilizing as the visitor established deeper connections. "Energy levels holding at 36%, Argos reported. "Reactor containment field stabilizing." Mira took a cautious step closer. "Can you understand me?" she asked. The Zenovian turned slightly, eyes focusing on Mira while maintaining the neural connections. A soft voice, melodic and slightly synthesized, emerged from a translator device at their throat. "Yes, I am Lyris, engineering specialist. Your ship's systems are critically damaged." "I noticed," Mira replied, a touch of dry humor creeping into her voice despite the situation. "Thank you for your help. But isn't this dangerous for you? The atmosphere, the radiation." Lyris's expression remained impassive, but the neural filaments pulsed slightly. "The risk is acceptable. The alternative is failure of your reactor within the hour. Neither of us would survive. You could return to your ship." "Negative. The distance is too great given current atmospheric conditions. My vessel is designed for short-range exploration only. It cannot achieve escape velocity from this moon alone." So they were both trapped unless the Ariadne could be repaired. Mira nodded slowly, understanding the situation more clearly now. What can I do to help? Lyris gestured toward a secondary control panel. Monitor power distribution. Alert me to any fluctuations above 5% in either direction. Mira moved to the indicated panel, grateful to have a task. She watched the displays carefully, noting the unusual power flow patterns as Lyris's neural interface redirected energy throughout the ship's systems. Your neural connection. I thought Zenovians kept those shielded at all times, Mira said after several minutes of silence. The filaments pulsed briefly before Lyris responded. It is. Not done, but necessary now. The simple statement carried weight that Mira could only begin to understand. She knew from her limited interactions with Zenovians that their neural interfaces were considered deeply private, almost sacred. To expose them, especially to a human, would be seen as taboo in their culture. I appreciate the risk you're taking, she said quietly. Lyris did not respond verbally, but the neural filaments glowed slightly brighter for a moment before returning to their steady pulse. They worked in relative silence for the next hour, Mira monitoring the power levels, while Lyris directed the ship's repair systems through the neural interface. The temperature in the engine room gradually increased as environmental controls came back online, melting the frost that had begun to form on the walls and equipment. Hull integrity now at 63%, Argos reported. Life support systems at 72%. Reactor containment field stabilized at 81%. That's good progress, Mira said, allowing herself a small smile. Lyris disconnected several of the neural filaments from the main console, the tendrils retracting slightly, but remaining extended from their body. The immediate crisis is averted. However, significant repairs are still required before the ship will be capable of departure. Mira nodded, studying the displays. What about communications? Can we get a distress signal out? The communications array was severely damaged. I have rerouted power to the secondary systems, but the range will be limited. Perhaps sufficient to reach your ship's original destination. Nova Station, Mira supplied. It's about 3 light-years from here. Lyris considered this. Possible, but not certain. The signal would take time to reach them, and longer for rescue to arrive. Better than nothing, Mira said. Let's try. The ship suddenly lurched violently, throwing both of them against the nearest bulkhead. Alarms blared once more as the lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. Argos, what's happening? Mira shouted, pulling herself upright. Seismic activity detected, the AI responded, its voice breaking up. An icequake. Magnitude 7.3 and increasing. Another violent shudder ran through the ship, accompanied by the terrible sound of tearing metal. Mira grabbed onto a support beam to steady herself as the floor seemed to drop beneath her. Hull breach detected in sections 14 through 17. Argos reported. Automatic bulkheads failing to respond. Lyris was already moving, neural filaments retracting partially as they headed toward the door. We must seal the breach manually. The ship cannot withstand the pressure differential. Mira followed quickly, grabbing an emergency repair kit from a wall compartment as they passed. The corridors were plunged into near darkness, the emergency lighting casting everything in a bloody glow that made navigation difficult. The ship continued to shake as the icequake intensified, the crystalline surface of Arcturon 3 fracturing beneath them. They reached Section 14 to find a nightmare scenario. A massive crack had opened in the hull, exposing the interior to the toxic atmosphere of the moon. The automatic bulkhead had partially closed, but jammed halfway, allowing the poisonous air to seep in. Ice was forming rapidly around the edges of the breach as the extreme cold of the moon's surface made contact with the relatively warm air of the ship. Lyris moved forward without hesitation, neural filaments extending once more, seeking connection points with the bulkhead controls. Mira hung back, coughing as traces of the toxic atmosphere reached her. Her eyes watered, and her lungs burned. "The mechanism is frozen," Lyris called, voice raised to be heard over the howling of escaping air. "We need to seal the breach directly." Mira nodded, opening the repair kit and pulling out a canister of emergency sealant. It wasn't designed for a breach this large, but it might buy them enough time to find a more permanent solution. Working together, they approached the breach. Mira could feel the bitter cold emanating from the opening, see the toxic clouds swirling beyond. Lyris's exposed skin had taken on a faintly blue tinge, but they showed no signs of slowing down or resealing their exosuit. "Your suit," Mira said between coughs. "You need to close it." Lyris shook their head. "The neural interface is still needed. I can withstand the exposure temporarily." Mira wasn't convinced, but there was no time to argue. She began applying the sealant around the edges of the breach, while Lyris used tools from their exosuit to bend the twisted metal back into place. The work was painful. The cold metal burned Mira's fingers through her gloves, and each breath brought more of the toxic atmosphere into her lungs. Another violent tremor shook the ship, widening the breach just as they had almost sealed it. A rush of poisonous air blasted through, sending both of them staggering backward. Mira fell hard, the sealant canister slipping from her grasp and skittering across the floor. Lyris recovered first, moving to retrieve the canister. As they bent down, Mira saw something alarming. The neural filaments were beginning to frost over, ice crystals forming along the delicate structures. Lyris's movements were becoming less fluid, more mechanical. "Lyris!" Mira called, struggling to her feet. "Your interface, it's freezing!" The Zenovian did not respond immediately, focused on retrieving the canister. When they straightened, Mira could see that the frost had spread to their exposed skin as well, creating patterns like delicate ferns across the iridescent surface. "We must complete the seal," Lyris said, their voice noticeably strained. "The ship's structural integrity cannot withstand much more." Mira wanted to protest, to insist that Lyris reseal their suit. But she knew they were right. The breach had to be closed, or they would both die here. She took the canister from Lyris and moved back toward the breach, fighting against the flow of escaping air. Working together once more, they managed to bend the metal back into position and apply the sealant along the edges. The material expanded as it made contact with the air, forming a tough, flexible barrier that gradually slowed the leak. "Argos!" Mira called, her voice hoarse from the toxic exposure. "Status report. Hull breach in Section 14 partially contained," the AI responded. "Seismic activity decreasing. Current magnitude 5.8 and falling." "The icequake is subsiding," Mira said, turning to Lyris. "We need to get you somewhere warmer. Your interface." Lyris swayed slightly, one hand reaching out to steady themselves against the wall. The neural filaments were moving sluggishly now, some of them beginning to retract back into their body, while others remained extended, still seeking connection points. "The cold affects the neural pathways," they admitted, their voice weaker than before. "I require thermal regulation." Mira moved quickly to support them, slipping an arm around their waist. She was surprised by how light they felt, how the exosuit seemed to be more substantial than the body within it. "Let's get back to the engine room. It's the warmest place on the ship right now." They made their way slowly through the corridors, Lyris becoming increasingly unsteady. The ship had stopped shaking as the ice quake subsided, but the damage had been done. New leaks hissed from cracked seals, and the temperature was dropping rapidly once more. "Warning," Argos announced as they neared the engine room. "Power surge detected in primary systems. Reactor containment field fluctuating." "What does that mean?" Mira asked, helping Lyris through the doorway into the engine room. "The damage from the icequake has created an unstable power flow," Lyris explained, their voice stronger as the warmth of the engine room began to thaw their frozen neural filaments. The reactor is attempting to compensate, but the fluctuations could lead to a breach of the containment field. And that would be bad. It would result in a catastrophic release of energy. The ship would be destroyed. Mira helped Lyris to the main console, where they immediately began reconnecting their neural interface. The filaments seemed to move more eagerly now, seeking the connection points with renewed vigor. "Is that safe?" Mira asked, concerned. "After what just happened?" Lyris hesitated, the filaments pausing in their movement. "It is necessary. The power surge must be contained and redirected. The ship's systems cannot do this automatically due to the damage." "But what about you? What happens if you connect to a system experiencing power surges?" The vertical pupils of Lyris's eyes contracted slightly. "There is risk of neural feedback. It would be painful." Mira suspected that was a severe understatement. "Is there another way? Something that doesn't involve you potentially frying your brain?" "The alternative is reactor containment failure. Neither of us would survive." Once again, they were faced with an impossible choice. Mira looked at the displays, trying to understand the complex energy patterns flowing through the ship's systems. The reactor containment field was indeed fluctuating wildly, the energy levels spiking and dropping in an unpredictable pattern. "All right," she said finally. "But I'm monitoring you. At the first sign of trouble, you disconnect. We'll find another solution." Lyris did not agree verbally, but they inclined their heads slightly before completing the neural connection. The moment the filaments made contact with the ship's systems, the displays stabilized somewhat, the wild fluctuations becoming more rhythmic, more controlled. Mira watched anxiously, dividing her attention between the reactor displays and Lyris's condition. The Zenovian stood rigidly at the console, eyes half closed in concentration, neural filaments pulsing with light that matched the energy flow of the ship. "Reactor containment field stabilizing," Argos reported. "Energy flow patterns normalizing." "That's good, right?" Mira asked, not taking her eyes off Lyris. "Affirmative, Captain. However, I am detecting unusual neural activity in the Zenovian interface. The pattern suggests strain beyond recommended parameters." Mira moved closer to Lyris, noting the tension in their posture and the increasingly rapid pulse of the neural filaments. "Lyris, are you all right?" The Zenovian's eyes opened slightly, pupils contracted to thin vertical lines. "The surge is stronger than anticipated. I am containing it." A sudden spike in the reactor readings coincided with a visible shudder from Lyris. Several of the neural filaments flared brilliantly, then darkened, their glow diminishing. "Neural pathways experiencing overload," Argos warned. "Recommend immediate disconnection." "Lyris, you need to disconnect," Mira urged, reaching out but stopping short of touching the neural interface. She wasn't sure if that would make things worse. "Cannot yet," Lyris managed, their voice strained. "The surge must be redirected first, or the reactor will—" Another spike, more violent than the first. Lyris gasped, a sound of pure pain that made Mira's heart clench. More of the neural filaments darkened, and Mira could see what looked like burns forming where they connected to Lyris's skin. "Reactor containment field at 92%, Argos reported. "Power surge continuing. Neural interface approaching critical failure." Mira made a decision. She couldn't stand by and watch Lyris sacrifice themselves. There had to be another way. She began scanning the engine room, looking for anything that might help divert the power surge away from the neural interface. Her eyes fell on a backup power distribution panel. Older technology. Manual, rather than automatic, but potentially useful. She moved quickly to it, pulling off the access panel to reveal a complex array of circuits and control modules. "Argos, can we reroute the power surge through this system?" she asked, already beginning to reconfigure the circuits. "Possible, Captain, but the panel is not designed to handle the current energy levels. It would likely result in system failure." Better the panel than Lyris, Mira muttered, continuing her work. She pulled circuit boards from their slots, rearranging them to create a new path for the energy flow. It was risky. She was no engineer, and one wrong connection could make everything worse, but she couldn't see another option. Lyris, she called, not looking up from her work. I'm setting up a manual bypass. When I give the signal, I need you to direct the surge toward the auxiliary power distribution system. The system cannot handle the load, Lyris replied, each word clearly an effort. Let me worry about that. Just be ready. Mira worked feverishly, connecting bypasses and rerouting circuits. She pulled components from other, less critical systems, improvising a buffer that might be able to absorb some of the surge before it reached the distribution panel. Reactor containment field at 94%. Argos reported. Power surge beginning to diminish. However, neural interface integrity at critical levels. Mira glanced over at Lyris and felt a stab of alarm. The Zenovian was visibly trembling now, skin taking on a grayish tinge that couldn't be healthy. Several more neural filaments had darkened completely, hanging limply from their body instead of pulsing with light. Almost there, Mira called, making the final connections in her improvised bypass. Just hold on a little longer. She connected the last circuit, then closed her eyes briefly, hoping she hadn't made a fatal error. Now, Lyris, redirect the surge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the displays flickered wildly as energy began flowing through the new pathway. Mira watched anxiously as the power levels in her improvised system rose rapidly, circuits heating up and components beginning to smoke. Argos status. Power surge redirected. Reactor containment field stabilizing at 97%. Neural interface load decreasing. Mira looked back at Lyris just in time to see them stumble backward from the console. Neural filaments disconnecting from the ship's systems. The Zenovian collapsed to their knees, neural interface retracting slowly back into their body. Some filaments moving normally while others hung motionless. Mira rushed to their side, kneeling beside them. Lyris, are you all right? The Zenovian's eyes were unfocused, the vertical pupils dilated widely. The surge. Contained. Ship. Safe. And you? Are you safe? Lyris didn't respond immediately, head tilting slightly as if listening to something Mira couldn't hear. Neural damage. Significant but not terminal. Self-repair initiated. Before Mira could respond, a series of small explosions came from the improvised bypass she had created. Sparks showered across the engine room as circuits overloaded and components failed. Auxiliary power distribution system failing, Argos announced. Surge contained. Reactor stabilizing at normal parameters. Mira helped Lyris to their feet, supporting them as they swayed unsteadily. Let's get you somewhere you can rest. The crew quarters should be intact. They made their way slowly through the ship, Lyris leaning heavily on Mira. The neural filaments had mostly retracted now, though several still extended limply from their body, apparently too damaged to withdraw completely. The crew quarters were cold, but undamaged by the icequake. Mira helped Lyris to her own cabin, the largest on the small ship, and eased them onto the bunk. Thank you, Lyris said softly, eyes closing briefly. Your intervention was unexpected, but appreciated. You risked your life to save my ship, Mira replied. I wasn't going to let you fry your brain in the process. A sound emerged from Lyris that Mira realized with surprise was a laugh, soft and musical, unlike any human laughter she had heard. A fair exchange. Mira smiled, then grew serious again. Your neural interface, how bad is the damage? Lyris's expression sobered. Several pathways are permanently compromised. Others will regenerate, given time. My ability to interface with technology will be diminished. The gravity of this statement wasn't lost on Mira. For a Zenovian, especially an engineering specialist, such damage would be devastating, like a human losing fingers or eyesight. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "If I had found another way—" Lyris raised a hand, stopping her. There was no other way. Without the interface, the ship would have been destroyed. We made the necessary choice. Mira nodded, accepting the truth of this, but still feeling a weight of responsibility. "Rest now. I'll check on the ship's status and see where we stand." She left Lyris resting and returned to the bridge, where Argos provided a full damage assessment. The news was better than she had feared, but still not good. Hull integrity at 71%. Life support systems at 83%. Reactor functioning at normal parameters. Communications partially restored, but limited to short-range transmissions only. FTL drive currently inoperable. Mira sighed, running a hand through her hair. "What about sublight engines? Can we at least get off this moon?" Sublight engines functional at 62% capacity. Sufficient for lunar escape and limited interplanetary travel, but not for reaching the nearest outpost without FTL capability. Not ideal, but better than being stranded. They could at least get into orbit and hope that the limited communications would be enough to signal for help. She spent the next few hours checking systems and making what repairs she could manage on her own. The ship was in better shape now than it had been immediately after the meteor strike, thanks largely to Lyris's intervention, but it was still far from fully operational. When she returned to the crew quarters, she found Lyris awake and sitting up, examining what appeared to be a small medical device from their exosuit. "Feeling better?" Mira asked, leaning against the doorframe. Lyris looked up, the vertical pupils of their eyes adjusting to focus on her. "Functioning adequately. Neural regeneration has begun." "Good. The ship's in better shape too. We can get off the moon, at least, though FTL is still down." Lyris nodded, setting aside the medical device. "My vessel carries replacement components that may be compatible with your FTL drive. With modifications—" "Really?" Mira tried not to sound too hopeful. "That would be incredible." "It is practical. Neither of us can reach safety alone. Together, we have sufficient resources." Mira smiled, struck once again by the straightforward practicality of the Zenovian. "Partners by necessity, then." "Indeed." Lyris rose from the bunk, moving with more steadiness than before. The exosuit remained partially open, revealing glimpses of the iridescent skin beneath. But the neural filaments were now fully retracted, no longer visible. "Can I ask you something personal?" Mira said as they made their way back toward the bridge. Lyris inclined their heads slightly, which Mira had come to recognize as a sign of assent. "The neural interface, exposing it the way you did? I know that's taboo for your people. Why did you take that risk for a stranger, for a human?" Lyris was silent for several steps, apparently considering the question carefully. When they finally spoke, their voice was quieter than usual. "Our cultural prohibitions are based on protection, both physical and psychological. The interface is vulnerable when exposed. It can be damaged, as you witnessed. It can also be violated, exploited. Your species has attempted to replicate our technology in the past, often through invasive means." Mira winced, knowing Lyris was referring to a dark chapter in human-Zenovian relations, incidents of kidnapping and forced study of Zenovian biology by certain human factions desperate to obtain their technological advantages. "But," Lyris continued, "prohibitions must sometimes be set aside when survival is at stake. I calculated that the risk of exposure was less than the certainty of death if the ship's systems failed." "A logical decision," Mira said. "Initially, yes." Lyris paused, seeming to struggle with the next part. "But logic does not explain why I maintained the exposure after the immediate crisis had passed, or why I did not reseal my suit during the hull breach, despite the danger." Mira waited, sensing there was more. "I have studied humans for many cycles," Lyris said finally. "Your species fascinates me. You rely so heavily on external technologies, yet you form connections without neural interfaces. You communicate with crude sounds and gestures, yet you understand each other on levels that sometimes exceed our own sophisticated systems. They had reached the bridge, but neither moved to enter, standing instead in the corridor as Lyris continued. I wanted to experience what it is like to be exposed, vulnerable, as humans always are. A brief pause. It was more difficult than I anticipated, but also illuminating. Mira found herself deeply moved by this admission. The idea that this advanced being had deliberately chosen vulnerability out of curiosity about human experience was both humbling and strangely touching. Thank you for sharing that with me, she said simply. Lyris's eyes met hers, the vertical pupils widening slightly. Thank you for not exploiting it. They entered the bridge together, moving to their respective stations, with a new understanding between them. Mira began checking the navigation systems, while Lyris examined the communications array. I've established contact with my vessel, Lyris announced, after several minutes. It will approach and dock with your ship. The components we need can be transferred more easily that way. Mira nodded, watching through the viewport as the pearlescent Zenovian vessel rose from the surface of the moon and moved gracefully toward the Ariadne. The docking process was smoother than she expected, the organic-looking ship interfacing seamlessly with her battered freighter. I will retrieve the components, Lyris said, moving toward the airlock that now connected the two vessels. I'll come with you, Mira offered. An extra pair of hands might help. Lyris hesitated, then nodded. Your assistance would be welcome. They crossed through the airlock into the Zenovian ship, and Mira found herself in an environment unlike any she had experienced before. The interior was a seamless blend of technology and biology, with surfaces that seemed to pulse with life and systems that grew rather than being constructed. The lighting was indirect but sufficient, casting everything in a soft, pearlescent glow, similar to the ship's exterior. It's beautiful, Mira said softly, turning slowly to take in the alien design. It is functional, Lyris replied, but there was a hint of pride in their voice. This way. They moved through curved corridors to what appeared to be a storage area, though it looked more like a garden than a traditional cargo hold. Components were arranged in organic-looking containers that seemed to be nourishing them somehow, keeping them viable. These are living technologies, Lyris explained, noticing Mira's fascinated expression. They must be maintained in a nurturing environment until installation. They're alive? In a sense, semi-organic. They integrate more effectively with both mechanical systems and neural interfaces this way. Lyris began selecting components, placing them carefully in a transport container. Mira assisted, following their instructions on which pieces to collect and how to handle them. As they worked, Mira became aware of subtle changes in Lyris's appearance. The exosuit remained partially open, but beneath it, their form seemed to be shifting slightly, becoming more fluid, less rigidly humanoid. Your appearance is changing, she observed, trying to keep her tone neutral. Lyris glanced down, as if just noticing the transformation themselves. Ah, yes. In my own environment, I do not maintain the rigid form required for interaction with humans. It is more comfortable this way. I didn't mean to make you self-conscious, Mira said quickly. I was just curious. Curiosity is valuable, Lyris replied. It leads to understanding. They continued gathering components in companionable silence. When the container was full, they made their way back toward the airlock. Before they reached it, Lyris paused, turning to face Mira. Would you permit me to ask a personal question in return? Of course. Why did you risk yourself to save my neural interface? The logical course would have been to disconnect me from the surge, regardless of the consequences to my neural pathways. The ship might have survived even with reactor damage. Mira considered the question seriously. It wasn't a logical decision, she admitted. I just couldn't stand by and watch you sacrifice yourself. Not when there might be another way. Even though we had just met, even though I am not human? Maybe because you're not human, Mira said, surprising herself with the realization. Humans, we don't always value each other the way we should. We get caught up in differences, where someone is from, what they believe, what they look like. But with you, those usual divisions didn't apply. I just saw someone risking everything to help, and I wanted to do the same. Lyris was silent for a long moment, the vertical pupils of their eyes contracting and expanding as if processing this information. That is a valuable perspective, they said finally. Thank you. They returned to the Ariadne with the components, and Mira helped Lyris install them in the ship's FTL drive. The work was intricate and time-consuming, requiring modifications to both the Zenovian technology and the human systems to make them compatible. The integration is not perfect, Lyris said as they completed the final connections. But it should provide sufficient FTL capability to reach your Nova station. And what about you? Mira asked. Will you return to your people? Lyris hesitated, hands stilling on the control panel. My mission was to study the crystalline formations on this moon. That data is now collected. I could return to the Zenovian outpost in this sector. Or, Mira prompted, sensing there was an alternative. Or, I could accompany you to Nova Station. The opportunity to observe human society directly would be valuable for my research. Mira smiled. I'd welcome the company, and the help with the ship. But won't your people object? Especially after what happened with your neural interface? Lyris's form shifted slightly beneath the partially open exosuit, a ripple of color passing across their iridescent skin. What happened here will not be discussed with others. Some experiences are personal. I understand. There is one more thing, Lyris said, turning away from the control panel. If I am to accompany you among humans, a different appearance would be advisable. Before Mira could ask what they meant, Lyris reached up and began to fully remove the exosuit. It came away in sections, revealing more of the iridescent skin beneath. But as the suit was removed, Lyris's form continued to change, becoming more definitively humanoid, though still unmistakably alien. When the transformation was complete, Lyris stood before her in what appeared to be civilian clothing, a simple tunic and leggings in shimmering material that complemented their natural coloration. The neural interface was completely hidden now, with no sign of the filaments that had extended from their body earlier. This form is more appropriate for interaction with humans, Lyris explained. Less threatening than the exosuit, more approachable. Mira was struck by the gesture, the deliberate choice to appear more vulnerable, more accessible. It seemed to represent a continuation of the trust that had begun when Lyris first removed their helmet. It suits you, she said simply. The ship's systems hummed to life around them as the new components integrated with the existing technology. Displays flickered with renewed energy, showing readiness for departure. FTL drive now at 78% capacity, Argos reported. Sufficient for jump to Nova Station. Course plotted and ready for execution. Mira moved to the pilot seat, beginning the launch sequence. Lyris took the station beside her, monitoring the new components as they powered up. The Ariadne lifted slowly from the surface of Arcturon 3, the crystalline ice fields falling away beneath them. The teal sky darkened to black as they ascended, stars appearing one by one until they were surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. Ready for FTL jump, Mira announced, hands moving confidently over the controls. Lyris nodded, neural interface connecting internally with the ship's systems in a way that was invisible, but that Mira could sense in the smooth response of the engines. Integration holding steady, energy flow nominal. Mira glanced at the alien beside her, thinking of all that had happened in the short time since the meteor strike. They had moved from strangers to reluctant allies to something approaching friends, all in the space of a few hours. The journey ahead would be interesting, to say the least. "Nova Station, here we come," she said, engaging the FTL drive. The stars blurred around them as the Ariadne leapt into faster-than-light travel, carrying human and Zenovian away from the frozen moon, where they had found unexpected connection in the face of danger. Behind them, the crystalline ice fields of Arcturon III continued their slow dance under teal skies, indifferent to the small drama that had played out upon their surface, a drama of trust and sacrifice, of barriers removed and understanding gained. In the silence of the bridge, illuminated by the glow of the control panels and the streaking stars beyond the viewport, Mira and Lyris exchanged a glance of mutual recognition. No words were needed to acknowledge what they both understood: that sometimes the most profound connections are formed when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we set aside the protective suits, literal or figurative, that we use to shield ourselves from the unknown. The Ariadne continued its journey through the stars, carrying its unlikely crew toward whatever awaited them at Nova Station and beyond.